There is a quiet moment, subtle, almost imperceptible, when you suddenly catch yourself taking life far too seriously. You notice the tension in your jaw, the weight on your shoulders, the grand importance you've assigned to your own thoughts, your opinions, your plans, your image. And then, out of nowhere, you laugh. Not mockingly, not cynically, but softly. The kind of laugh that feels like exhaling after holding your breath for too long. And in that instant, something inside you dies. Something heavy, something fragile, something that was never truly you. The ego. It doesn't vanish in fire or drama. It dissolves in the warmth of a simple laugh. A laugh that says, "I see you, little self. I see your performance, and I won't take you so seriously anymore." Because the ego cannot survive humor. It thrives on tension, on importance, on the desperate need to be right, to be admired, to be in control. But the moment you laugh at its exaggerated stories, its dramatic reactions, its endless demands, its power crumbles. And in its absence, what remains is honesty, softness, presence, freedom. The ego dies every time you laugh at it. Not because laughter destroys you, but because laughter reveals you. The ego's favorite game, making everything about you. The ego is a master of theater. It wants every situation to revolve around you. Your comfort, your reputation, your desires, your fears. It narrates your entire life as if you are the main character in a universe built exclusively around your preferences. Someone doesn't text back. The ego panics. What does this mean about me? A stranger looks at you oddly. The ego hunts for symbolism. You make a mistake. The ego screams as if the world ended, as if a crack formed in your very existence. The ego loves high stakes because high stakes keep it alive. But look closer. Most of the suffering the ego creates comes from stories that aren't even real. Stories it invents to preserve its own importance. And yet, you can break the spell with the simplest act: awareness. Awareness allows you to watch the ego without believing it, without clinging to it, without becoming its puppet. And when you watch it long enough, its patterns become almost comical. You see the melodrama, you see the exaggeration, you see the insecurity disguised as certainty, you see the pride pretending to be strength, and eventually, you laugh. Not in ridicule, but in compassion, because suddenly you understand. The ego isn't an enemy. It's a frightened inner child trying desperately to protect itself with stories too small for your soul. How humor becomes a spiritual doorway. Most people treat spirituality as something serious, solemn, ritualistic, heavy. But the universe is not humorless. Life is not humorless. Even existence itself often feels like a cosmic joke. Not in a mocking way, but in a playful, dancing, paradoxical way. The Stoics understood this. Nature understood this. Your deeper self understands this too. The ego thinks enlightenment is a crown you earn. But the soul knows enlightenment is the moment you stop trying to look enlightened. Humor breaks the illusion. It loosens the rigidity of identity. It cracks the shell of "I am this" and lets the light of "I am" shine through. Humor is humility. Humility is alignment. And alignment is peace. When you can look at your own mind, your reactions, your contradictions, your fears, and smile softly, you are already free. Because the very act of laughing means you are no longer trapped in the drama. You are watching it. You are bigger than it. You are the sky, not the storm passing through. Why the ego hates to be laughed at. The ego survives on seriousness. It needs you to believe that every mistake is catastrophic, every disagreement is a threat, every flaw is a crack in your worth. It needs you to panic so it can step in and pretend to save you. But when you laugh, you take away its fuel. You take away the illusion that everything about you must be perfect. Laughter removes the pressure to be somebody impressive, somebody admirable, somebody untouchable. The ego panics when you laugh because it senses you're no longer under its spell. You're no longer playing its game, no longer worshipping its importance, no longer confusing it for your true self. This is why laughter feels like liberation, because in that single moment, you step outside the role the ego wrote for you. You stop acting. You start being. The tension of defending yourself. Have you ever noticed how exhausting it is to defend your image? To keep up the identity you hope others will admire? To protect the mask the ego carefully crafted for you? One wrong impression, and the ego spirals. One mistaken assumption, and the ego prepares for battle. One criticism, and the ego screams for retaliation. Why? Because the ego believes its survival depends on your reputation. But here is the truth. You are not your reputation. And your reputation is not your worth. The moment you can laugh at someone misunderstanding you, the ego's entire fortress collapses. Because suddenly you're no longer terrified of being misunderstood. You understand that truth needs no defense. The ego defends the imaginary. The soul stands untroubled in what is real. And when you see this, you laugh, not at yourself, but at the absurdity of ever trying to control how the world sees you. The quiet strength in not taking yourself seriously. Strength is not found in perfection, in seriousness, or in maintaining an unshakable image. True strength is the ability to remain soft in a world obsessed with hardness. True strength is the ability to laugh at your mistakes without collapsing into shame. True strength is the willingness to be human, beautifully, imperfectly human. The ego fears being human. It wants to be invincible, untouched, unshaken. But you are not here to perform invincibility. You are here to live. And living requires flexibility, lightness, openness. Laughter unmasks the ego and reveals a deeper strength. A strength that doesn't need to be proven. A strength that doesn't need armor. A strength that feels like peace. The strongest people you'll ever meet are not the ones who control the room. They are the ones who can smile at themselves without flinching. Because they know their worth isn't fragile. Their identity isn't a performance. Their peace isn't something the world can touch. They know the ego dies each time laughter rises. And what remains is the real self. Unburdened, unafraid, unclenched. The ego's favorite illusion. I am what I think. The ego's greatest trick is subtle, almost invisible. It convinces you that you are your thoughts. A thought appears. I'm not good enough. And the ego says, yes, that's you. A thought arises. They don't respect me. And the ego whispers, correct, prepare your anger. A thought forms. I need to prove myself. And the ego nods enthusiastically. Exactly. Without their validation, you're nothing. The ego treats every thought like scripture. Undeniable, unchallengeable, sacred. But here's the quiet truth the ego hopes you never realize. You can't be your thoughts. You're the one who notices them. Thoughts are visitors. You are the home. Thoughts are clouds. You are the sky. Thoughts pass. You remain. And when you finally see this clearly, you laugh. Because suddenly the entire game changes. How can a passing cloud define the sky? How can a temporary thought define who you are? The ego depends on your belief in its stories. But when you laugh at its seriousness, its spell breaks, its throne crumbles, and its grip loosens. Not because you defeated it, but because you stopped believing it. The drama of I, me, mine. The ego builds its entire identity around three small words. I, me, Mine. Listen closely, and you'll hear these words everywhere in the ego's internal monologue. I can't lose this. They offended me. This is my achievement. This is my reputation. I must protect myself. My pride is hurt. Every sentence centers around the self as if the world orbits your personal significance. But life doesn't actually work that way. Your experiences are real. Your feelings matter. Yet they are not the center of the universe. When something goes wrong, the ego says, "Why is this happening to me?" But life responds, "It's not. It's simply happening." When someone criticizes you, the ego cries, "They're attacking me." But truth whispers, "They're expressing themselves." Whether it reflects you is another question entirely. The ego creates personal drama out of neutral events. And the moment you catch this, you notice how absurd it is, how exaggerated, how theatrical, how unnecessary. And you laugh. Not cruelly, not dismissively, but knowingly, because you see the ego for what it is. A storyteller who never learned to edit its own script. The ego's fear of being ordinary. Deep down, the ego is terrified of a single thing: being ordinary. It wants to be special, unique, superior, noticed, admired, envied. It wants your story to be more dramatic than everyone else's. But life is not a competition for significance. Your worth is not measured by how impressive you seem. The most peaceful people are not the ones the world praises loudly. They are the ones who no longer need the world to praise them at all. The ego resists ordinariness, but your soul finds rest there. The ego craves attention, but your heart longs for authenticity. The ego seeks superiority, but your deeper nature seeks connection. And when you recognize this desperate craving for specialness, you no longer take it seriously. You smile. You exhale. You let the ego crave what it craves, without believing it defines you. In that moment of soft amusement, another piece of the ego dies, and you feel lighter. The problem with needing to be right. Have you noticed how aggressively the ego defends its opinions? Not because the truth is at stake, but because the ego feels that being wrong is the same as being inadequate. It clings to beliefs as if its existence depends on them. A disagreement arises, and the ego stiffens. A debate begins, and the ego sharpens its teeth. Someone questions you, and the ego raises its shield. But ask yourself honestly, has being right ever brought you lasting peace? Did winning the argument make your heart more open? Did proving a point make your relationships deeper? Did stubbornness ever make life easier? Of course not. Peace never comes from winning. It comes from understanding. The moment you realize you don't need to be right to be whole, you laugh. Because you see the ego for what it is. A scared little creature terrified of dissolving into humility. And yet humility is where freedom begins. The ego and the illusion of control. The ego believes that if it can control enough things, it can control life itself. Control the outcome. Control the impression you make. Control how others behave. Control how the future unfolds. Control every variable until nothing unpredictable remains. But control is the most exhausting illusion ever invented. The more you try to control, the more anxious you become. The more anxious you become, the more you try to control. And thus, the ego keeps you spinning in a cycle you can never win. Because life cannot be controlled, only participated in. When you laugh at your own attempts to predict every possibility, you release the tension that has been tightening your chest for years. You stop wrestling the river and start floating with it. You stop micromanaging existence and start dancing with it. And you realize, life is far more graceful when you stop trying to force it. The freedom of not being a character anymore. Every ego writes a character for you to play. The confident one, the successful one, the wise one, the admired one, the strong one, the unbreakable one. But all characters are costumes, and eventually, they grow heavy, tight, restricting. When you laugh at your own character, you unzip the costume and step out of it. You discover that you do not need to perform to belong. You do not need to impress to be loved. You do not need to curate yourself like a gallery to be worthy. The character was never real. The actor was always you. And when the character dissolves, you feel lighter, truer, more spacious, as if life suddenly has more room to breathe through you. The ego fears this moment, but your spirit has been longing for it. When you watch the ego without becoming it, there is a shift, subtle but life-changing. When you stop being the ego and begin watching it, the ego feels tension. You watch it. The ego gets offended. You watch it. The ego wants to prove something. You watch it. The ego longs for validation. You watch it. And in that watching, you create space. Space for presence. Space for clarity. Space for peace. This is the beginning of real freedom. Because the ego can yell, it can panic, it can react. But it cannot control you if you are no longer identified with it. You watch it. You breathe. You smile. And suddenly the drama loses its weight. You laugh because you finally see the ego's antics as they truly are. A harmless puppet that only had power when you believed its strings were your own. When you stop defending the ego, life softens. There is a moment, rare but unmistakable, when you stop defending the ego. You stop explaining yourself. You stop correcting everyone's perceptions. You stop needing to fix every misunderstanding. You stop performing. And in that moment, you feel something unexpected. Life softens. Conversations become lighter because you're no longer protecting an identity. Relationships deepen because you're no longer afraid to be seen. Your mind relaxes because it's no longer preparing counter-arguments for imaginary battles. When you stop defending the ego, the world stops feeling hostile. Because the hostility wasn't coming from the world, it was coming from inside you. From the tension of maintaining a self-image that was never solid to begin with. This softness isn't weakness. It's strength without armor. It's confidence without performance. It's peace without conditions. You realize something simple but profound. When you stop being the ego's bodyguard, it stops needing protection. And from that point onward, laughter becomes easier. It rises naturally. It rises honestly. It rises from a place of truth, the ego's final trick, pretending to be your inner voice. The ego rarely shouts. Often, it whispers. It whispers with familiarity. It imitates your tone. It mimics your thinking patterns. It pretends to be your intuition, your conscience, your wisdom. But watch closely. The ego's voice always carries tension, urgency, fear, defensiveness, comparison, judgment, pressure. Your real inner voice carries none of these. Your real voice is quiet, simple, clear. It speaks in calm truths, not frantic narratives. It guides without force. It clarifies without shame. It encourages without fear. The ego is the part of you that tries to scare you into control. Your true self is the part of you that invites you into presence. Once you learn to distinguish the two, the ego loses its disguise. And when it tries to manipulate you with its usual melodrama, you can finally see through it. And you laugh. Because the performance is obvious. Because the costume is slipping. Because the ego is trying desperately to play a role you no longer need it to play. The ego hates being exposed. But your true self breathes more freely with every laugh. The ego's death is not violent, it's gentle. Most people think the ego must be destroyed through effort, discipline, or force. But force only strengthens the ego, because resistance feeds the illusion of self. The ego doesn't die through battle. The ego dissolves through understanding. It dissolves when you smile at its unnecessary tension. It dissolves when you laugh at its exaggerated fears. It dissolves when you notice how it clings to opinions and pride and image. It dissolves when you see its patterns without judging them. It dissolves when you stop identifying with it. The ego doesn't need a funeral. It needs a gentle acknowledgement that it is not you. And as this realization deepens, the ego stops being a prison and becomes a companion, a little creature inside your mind that you can navigate with humor and compassion. It no longer defines you. It no longer steers you. It no longer consumes you. It simply becomes what it always was, a temporary mask you no longer feel the need to wear. How laughter opens the door to presence. Presence is not something you attain. It is something you remember. You are always present. You've simply forgotten how to return. And laughter is one of the quickest paths back. Have you ever laughed so deeply that for a moment all thought vanished? All worry dissolved, all tension evaporated. In that moment you were pure presence. Thought stopped, identity paused, time disappeared. This is why laughter feels like liberation, because it momentarily erases the ego's stories. And in that brief silence, you experience the vastness of your real nature. Laughter is not the opposite of seriousness. It is the opposite of ego. Ego collapses when you laugh because laughter returns you to the simplicity of being. And being is the one place the ego cannot survive. You don't awaken by becoming more. You awaken by becoming less. The ego constantly urges you to become more impressive, more confident, more successful, more unique, more enlightened. But awakening is not an addition. Awakening is a subtraction. It is the removal of everything false, everything forced, everything defended, everything pretended. It is the falling away of the stories you tell yourself about who you are. It is the recognition that beneath the ego's layers lies a simple presence that was always enough. You do not awaken into a grander version of yourself. You awaken into the version of yourself that requires nothing grand. And the instant you stop trying to become someone, you begin to truly see the one who has always been here. The ego dies because there is nothing left to defend. Only space, only awareness, only peace. The closing meditation, laughing your way back to yourself. Now, find your breath again. Slow, steady, natural. If it feels right, close your eyes. Notice the parts of you that feel tight. Notice the thoughts trying to protect an image. Notice the tension of needing to appear a certain way. See if you can smile gently at it all. Not dismissively, not mockingly, just kindly, like watching a child act out a role they believe is real. Notice the drama your mind creates. Notice the seriousness with which it builds entire narratives. And gently, softly, let yourself laugh, even if it's just a breath that feels like the beginning of a smile. Because in that tiny, sacred moment, the ego loosens, the mask falls, the weight lifts, the mind clears, the heart opens, the world softens, and you return to the simple truth. You were never the character. You were never the story. You were never the mask. You were never the ego. You are the one who sees it, who watches it, who laughs at it, who remains when all its noise fades. Laugh gently, freely, lightly. Let the ego dissolve in the warmth of your understanding, and walk through life with a softness that the ego cannot imitate, because the ego dies every time you laugh at it. And what remains is the one who was never born and will never die. The one who simply is. Pure, unbounded, present, free.